We have been listening to the confirmation hearings of Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson. You heard the chairman gavel into the recess there. I'm Ari Melber. This is The Beat. And we're going to give you a real breakdown now with some of the time we have. We have been covering, of course, the hearings for President Biden's nominee to the Supreme Court. This has been the first day of the questioning, which is why The Beat is reporting from Washington tonight with some very special guests right here to break down this hearing in a moment. And here's what you need to know about the news that has emerged. There are a few takeaways. First, at this point, Judge Jackson is on track for confirmation of the Supreme Court. She's been sober, poised, and largely unflappable throughout this day. There are no public signs of cracks in the Democrats' coalition to get her confirmed. Second, there are signs that Judge Jackson may draw fewer votes than the 53 that she did get in her last Senate confirmation for her current job, because Republicans appeared largely united on this committee in challenging her judgment and her alleged views, like Senator Graham, who did vote for her last year, but today was questioning her advocacy for Guantanamo detainees and at one point ultimately just marching out of the hearing.
These were 5 people that we had in our control that are now helping the Taliban run the country. As an American, does that bother you?
Well, obviously, Senator, any repeated criminal behavior or repeated attacks, acts of war, bother me as an American.
Well, it bothers me. While I will not hold it against you, nor should I, the fact that you represent Gitmo detainees, I think it's time to look at this system anew, folks.
Another takeaway, there were several Republican senators who used this hearing to go after more general culture and hot-button issues, almost more than they went after the judge. That may be good news for her. Take what might come to be known as the Lil Baby portion of this hearing. Ted Cruz attacking critical race theory and literally displaying pictures of cartoon babies from children's books to discuss whether babies are, quote, racist or not. This baby talk overlapped with repeated attacks on how the judge has sentenced criminal defendants. Republicans arguing not only that she might be somehow soft on crime, but that perhaps she is pro-criminal. It was a framework pushed by Cruz, and then more recently, if you've been watching, Josh Hawley, which linked to broader conservative arguments that we may hear going into the midterms about something that is true, which is that crime is on the rise in America.
In 100% of the cases, was the evidence less than the prosecutors asked for?
Senator, the evidence in these cases are egregious. Judges have to take into account the personal circumstances of the defendant because that's a requirement of Congress.
You had discretion in these cases, and you used your discretion to choose the sentences that you did.
This is not done at the level of...
But you had discretion, Judge. You admit that, right? I just want to be clear.
Senator, sentencing is a discretionary act of a judge, but it's not a numbers game.
That exchange there brings us to one final takeaway today before I bring in our guests, and that's just how often the judge seemed to breeze through much of the questioning, offering either crisp legal answers or policy deflections. And she said under oath it was her duty to avoid offering any policy opinions, basically drawing a line between what politicians may prefer, that's their job, and what judges do, that's their job. It was dry and at times even kind of boring, perhaps deliberately so.
I am particularly mindful of not speaking to policy issues. Our obligation as judges is not to create policy. I believe that judges are not policymakers.
That's the way the system works. Are you okay with that?
As a policy matter, Senator, I'm not speaking to my views.
Does that make sense to you as a way to deal with these detainees?
Senator, I'm not in a position to speak to the policy.
And it went like that over and over. I'm excited to tell you we have some great guests to get into this big day in Washington. Judith Brown-Deanna, civil rights lawyer, executive director of the Advancement Project, and Washington Post columnist and longtime MSNBC analyst E.J. Dionne. Welcome to both of you.
Great to be with you.
Good to be here.
What did we see there?
Well, we've seen a lot of things throughout the day. First, she was great.
She answered the questions. She made sure that they understood what her role was as a judge. She said, stay in my lane. I am not a policy maker. But what we also have seen is that the Republicans are making all the arguments for the midterms. They're talking about critical race theory. They are talking about soft on crime. And she keeps steering them back to look at my record. Over 500 decisions that we could be talking about.
Right. And that was something that I thought she did quite effectively. A lot of the Republican questioning, to be fair, just sort of walked around her record. Grassley and others didn't really try to land these punches. What does break through is what we see from some of the more bombastic senators, EJ. And, you've covered a lot of hearings. We all remember when John Roberts was asked about racist babies. I'm kidding.
No, there you go.
It didn't happen. Let me play it and get your response, because it is that ridiculous. Here we go.
Do you agree with this book that is being taught with kids that babies are racist?
Senator, I do not believe that any child should be made to feel as though they are racist, or though they are not valued, or though they are less than. They don't come up in my work as a judge, which I'm respectfully here to address.
Okay, good. Then let's go back to your work as a judge.
I thought that was one of her best answers in two different ways. One is she answered the question that shouldn't have been asked, but then she, in the most polite possible way, essentially said to Senator Cruz, what the heck are you asking me this question for? I'm here to talk as a judge. And she did that all day long. My favorite exchange is one you'll never show on television because it was kind of boring and academic, but it was when Senator Sass started asking her about originalism. And it was actually a very substantive exchange, which I suspect is going to be shown in a lot of law schools someday. And it just showed how smart she was, and that she sort of explained originalism, Justice Scalia's idea, probably better than most conservative law professors could explain originalism. I think what you were seeing is Cruz and Hawley practicing lines for the 2024 Republican primary. Clearly, they want to be out there at the edges. But I think the other thing you saw is they don't really have anything on her. And that's why they got to go to these child pornography cases, where, in fact, she did give some pretty tough sentences, and why, as also for 2022 elections, they're doing the CRT thing and the soft on crime thing. Although there are times when you wanted to ask, would they be going so hard on CRT if she were not a black woman appointee? Right. I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a question that came, I suspect, crossed a lot of people's minds.
Yes, that exchange reminded me, and even the questions about Dred Scott, reminded me of being in law school and the microaggressions that black people experience, black women in particular, from law professors. I mean, I remember being asked my first day of property in my second year, a hypothetical that had to deal with drugs in a car. And all the other white students got other kinds of hypotheticals that had nothing to do with criminal activity. And I remember saying to the professor, I can't answer that hypothetical because I cannot relate to it. And so this is the kind of questioning that she is receiving that is really targeting her, but is also targeting their base, because they want their base to know that we are on it with this critical race theory thing, and we are going to fight for it. And it's playing into racial fears and racial threats and the concerns about the 2022 midterms.
What did you think of the way she handled a lot of these queries?
I mean, I was impressed. Listen, she has the temperament to be a Supreme Court justice, the patience, the wherewithal to stick through it and to answer the questions and to bring it back to why are we here? We're here to talk about my decisions, about my record, and about what I would be doing on the Supreme Court.
And she was so red, white, and blue. The way she talked about America, the way she talked about the founders, the way she talked about our history, her family and law enforcement has come up. I mean, everything she did was a sort of straight up contradiction to what they were trying to do to her. And I think it was pretty effective for anybody out there who is not dug in against her. I think she did herself an enormous amount of good with undecided folks out there. I don't think that matters. I agree with what you said at the beginning. I think she has the votes already. But I think she may have made it easier for at least a couple of Republicans to vote for her. And I hope they do. I think it would be better for the Republican Party not to go up against this really qualified woman as a bloc.